with you in the Parliament. Thank you all for being here. In the EU, we realize that the gender pay gap will persist until at least 2086 if we would not work on binding legislation. So the average of the gender pay gap in the EU would stick around 13%, and that's significant. And we cannot wait over 60 years for equal pay. So the European Pay Transparency Directive targets the unjustified pay gaps, and it was an honor to lead the negotiations on this. It is part of the solution to tackle the gender pay gap. And for the first time in history of EU legislation, we managed to get in the recognition of intersectional discrimination. I found it very important that we realize and that we recognize that not all women are the same. Depending on how you look like, what your name is, where you're coming from, you'll have more chance when it gets to pay discrimination. And we also, for the first time ever in EU legislation, got the recognition of non-binary people. So we go beyond the genders that we know, and it's very important that we start making these inclusive legal frameworks so we facilitate all kinds of people in our society. So the Pay Transparency Directive is in the essence really about the right to information, because when you have the information, it will strengthen also your strategic position as a woman, for example, in negotiations about your salary. So the directive grants all employees access to salary information, all the EU workers, it doesn't matter who you are, regardless of the company size, and you can know the average salary levels and the criteria also behind them, even in job applications. Pay secrecy is banned now, so this is really about empowering workers to take legal action if they suspect unfair pay. And indeed, we have shifted the burden of proof to employers in discrimination cases, streamlining justice here. So the reporting obligations is a really strong element of this Pay Transparency Directive. So the companies with 250 plus employees will report on an annual basis, and all the other sizes will report every 3 years. And we also invite smaller companies to report on the gender pay gap in their company. So the reports must detail gender pay gaps, and they also need to categorize them by job. And the data will be publicly available. So that means that we are promoting transparency here also. And it's not to say to companies or to organizations like, hey, you're not doing a good job and now we're going to fine you or sanction you. No, it's really about the power of transparency, and also for organizations, public and private, to know what they can do better and where they can create solutions. So companies with unjustified pay gaps of the 5% or more must undergo joint pay assessments. They need to do that with worker representatives, with social partners, to rectify the discrepancies. So it's about companies being transparent also here in the recruitment process and also in the hiring. And that also needs to change here when it comes to hiring. They need to message everything they're doing, public and private organizations, to understand, for people to understand and also to follow the process, but mainly to get information on an equal basis. So when it comes to women in female-dominated sectors, that's also what we're trying to discuss here. When we look at the female-dominated sectors, unfortunately, it highlights the persistent distribution of gender roles in society. And a prime example of such sectors is the social health sector. However, the general conclusion is that male-dominated industries tend to have higher wages than industries and occupations where you mainly find women. So meaning it does not really matter where we look and where we discuss the topic of the gender pay gap. It's bad everywhere. So when we work on the strengthening of the economic position of women in societies, we get a stronger economy, and we make women and girls less vulnerable. We make them more resilient. So the whole essence here is that we have a global strategy to make sure that women are empowered when it comes to their economic and financial position. And take, for example, the position of women, single mothers in our society. It is very hard for women to put everything together, to work, to have ambitions, make a career, take care of your children. And our society is not so friendly in this regard for women, nor does it facilitate the needs they deserve. If we look at occupations like nursing, caregiving, childcare, predominantly employ women, these roles all demand extensive training, dedication, countless unpaid hours, so many crucial tasks are often relegated to secondary status despite their fundamental importance to the job. And women often do not get paid for it. So what becomes evident is that women withstand the worst of unpaid labor in already undervalued and underpaid professions, take into account all the informal care they do, only making the gender pension gap bigger. So these hours and resources have historically gone uncompensated, perpetuating systemic inequalities. So therefore, we first need to recognize the root causes, which we have just also discussed and touched upon, before we can talk about solutions. So I'm going to finish. To address this effectively, we must first acknowledge and elevate awareness of the problem, ensuring that it receives attention it deserves. So here the role of the UN and the EU come together to play an assertive role addressing the gender pay gap. We need to work on the root causes, making sure that we have data also from the public and private sector as well on what is going on and analyze it very well. And we need to raise awareness about social perceptions and biases that enforce these ideas of devaluation of female-dominated professions. So serious change in societal norms and attitude is needed. So to conclude, we need to provide support and resources for women to negotiate fair compensation and challenge discriminatory practices in the workplace, and make sure that companies and organizations take their responsibility, that they play a role, and we need to encourage employers to recognize and reward contributions of all employees regardless of the gender and job sector. And companies and organizations are part of the solution. At the end, they need a holistic approach to foster gender equality. And it's not only the gender pay gap, it's also many other things that we all need to work on. And they need to understand gender equality is a smart thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, for the future, you're going to hear this. Thanks very much, Samira. And it's a great model, I think, for others to use and implement appropriately, because it does bring that very important transparency. We are running very short of time, which is a ridiculous thing to say because it feels like we've just started. You're going to hear from my colleague Evelyn Regner now.